This podcast contains detailed plot spoilers, adult language, and mature themes. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to a podcast of Rare Antiquities, episode 23. On today's show, we are going to discuss and analyze Robert Wise's 1971 science fiction film, The Andromeda Strain, or as I incorrectly pronounced last time, The Andromeda Strain. Alameda.
Nucleovessels.
Yeah. My name is Harry, and I'll be your host for today's show.
And I am your co-host. My name is Geoff.
So, Geoff, you had previously mentioned you had seen this film before, and this is a film adaptation of Michael Crichton's novel of the same name. Can you give me any early thoughts and memories of watching this movie from before, and did you by chance ever read the novel?
I can give you some, when I saw the film, watching it for the episode here, it was not familiar, so I think I must have misspoken. Thought I had seen it, but it if I did, it didn't stick. So I didn't have much memory watching it here. I have read the novel. I read the novel many years ago when I was in junior high school. So mid-90s. I was around grade 8, I think. And just to, give you a little background, somebody had introduced me to Jurassic Park, obviously Michael Crichton's most famous novel. Mm-hmm. And it was a couple years after it had been published, and I was kind of mad that this book existed, and nobody fucking told me that there was this book out there about genetically engineered dinosaurs. Like any self-respecting, 12-year-old, 13-year-old kid, like dinosaurs are a pretty big deal. So I devoured Jurassic Park probably like 10 times. I read it over and over and over again, and this was probably about a year before the film was released. And then I started to read up on not all of Michael Crichton's novels, but a good portion of them. In The Andromeda Strain was one of the ones that I came to over the next few years. So yeah, I read it probably in the mid to late 90s, and I did attempt to watch the 2008 miniseries also based on the novel, but
which I think you had mentioned was a piece of shit.
Yeah, it's best left buried 6 levels deep like the facility in the film.
Or maybe just go out with the Atari cartridges in the middle of the desert.
Yeah, well, they dug those up, and we don't want anybody to find that.
The ET ones, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm glad that, maybe you'll get a fresh take on this. But did you remember a lot of the novel, like this one?
Once, not at first. I'd actually gone looking for it to see if I still had my copy of it, just to do a quick scan of it to refresh my memory, but I don't think I have it anymore. But once I watched the film, I did recall a lot of, if not the specifics of the novel, the general tone and prose style of the novel as I watched the movie. So definitely something we can discuss if you want to get into that.
Yeah, maybe you could maybe bring up some points later in the movie if you want. I know a couple of changes, but from what I know, it's a pretty faithful adaptation from novel to the big screen. So this movie was directed by Robert Wise, whom we had previously mentioned briefly before in our Star Trek podcast. And while Wise passed away in 2005, I find that he really isn't all that mentioned on lists of best directors that you always hear about, along the likes of Spielberg, Kubrick, Coppola, Scorsese, and those kind of guys. Wise was a pretty renowned director. I mean, he did win Academy Awards as Best Director for West Side Story and The Sound of Music. He was also nominated for Academy and other awards on many of his other projects. And what's unique about him is that he's dipped his hands into every genre of a film as a director: science fiction, musicals, westerns, noir films, war films, horrors, and dramas. And Scorsese himself has called Wise an actual artist, not just an artisan. In addition to his directorial work, he was president of the Directors Guild. He was president of the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences. He sat on the board of trustees for the AFI, the American Film Institute, and he was a leading member of the National Council of Arts and Science. And fittingly for us geeks, his actual last project before he died was actually overseeing the director's edition of Star Trek: The Motion Picture, in which he provided commentary for and created those new optical effects and sound mix. And the reason why I bring some of this up here, Geoff, is for the average film goer, You don't really hear his name come up in a lot of conversations, but from my research, I mean, I always loved him from Star Trek, the motion picture. And I felt and I've seen a couple of his other pictures, and The Sound of Music, I knew he directed that as well. But the man really is a legend in many aspects. I mean, his earlier work too, I mean, he was a film editor on Citizen Kane. So
Yeah.
what are your thoughts here?
Well, I can only agree. He's a legend. I mean, how else do you describe it? I haven't seen a lot of his films, but the filmography speaks for itself. I'm a big fan of Star Trek: The Motion Picture. I think it's extremely underrated film.
Yeah, likewise.
Both as a film and even within the Star Trek fandom, I'd say it's criminally underappreciated. I think my favorite film of his is actually The Day the Earth Stood Still. It's a science fiction classic. Not much more to be said about Robert Wise. I mean, he's, fantastic. He's a legend, does not get the accolades that some of the other of his contemporaries do get. That's for sure.
That's a bit of a shame, in my opinion. Yeah, because, I didn't know half of the works that he has been involved in until I did the research for this podcast, and just kind of blew me away because, yeah, as I said, you don't really hear a lot talked about him, but very respected man in the industry. And I think from what I mentioned before, just his involvement in everything, he was very renowned. And I think he got the respect from his peers, but not the average filmgoer, unfortunately.
No, he didn't quite break through into the upper echelon mainstream. I mean, things were a bit different for directors too in those times, right? During the 40s and 50s, the director of the film didn't have the celebrity that directors have today. Often the producer's name was the one that sort of headlined the film, and the director was basically the guy who was pointing the camera, So, definitely a little bit different in his time, but he did make his mark. So, you and I know him, so that's obviously good enough, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So it's good enough for the podcast. So we stake the claim that we know of the man and he's awesome.
Yeah. You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah, you heard it here. Okay, so how about we get into the plot summary here?
Let's do it.
All right. So 2 crewmen of the U.S. government are sent to retrieve a satellite that has returned and fallen in the town of Piedmont, New Mexico. As they arrive, they find the town empty with dead bodies everywhere, and then suddenly they pass away. The U.S. government and Army generals then initiate Project Wildfire, code named for a suspected extraterrestrial pathogen's presence, its retrieval, and its analysis. They bring about 4 scientists and doctors: Dr. Jeremy Stone, Dr. Mark Hall, Dr. Charles Dutton, and Dr. Ruth Levitt to investigate. Dr. Stone and Hall are sent into the town wearing hazmat suits. There they retrieve the satellite and find 2 survivors, a baby and a sick old man. Doctors Dutton and Levitt meet up with Dr. Stone and Hall at his top-secret underground laboratory in Nevada, where they all go through several decontamination procedures. Hall is also informed that he will be responsible for aborting nuclear self-destruction of the facility and surrounding area in case of an outbreak, and is given a key to disarm the nuclear device. In fact, Dr. Stone already has recommended nuclear destruction of Piedmont to eliminate chances of anything spreading further, but the president decided to wait for 48 hours before making the call. The team begins their experiments and analysis of the agent inside the satellite, as well as tests on the baby and old man. What is different about these 2 individuals that allowed them to survive? The team soon confirms that the pathogen is transmitted by air, kills lab animals instantly, and is too large to be a virus. They finally discover a greenish throbbing mass on a small piece of meteorite on the satellite, and they codename it Andromeda. Hall soon determines that the old man has abnormally acidic blood from drinking sterno to relieve his stomach ulcer pains, but there are still no anomalies found in the baby. Further study finds that Andromeda is a life form of similar chemical composition to that of Earth life, but it lacks amino acids, enzymes, and proteins. Later they deduce that Andromeda's crystalline structure will allow it to convert energy to mass and vice versa. It can consume any resource without waste. This, of course, leads to the conclusion that a nuclear explosion would provide Andromeda with enough energy to expand and produce a super colony in a single day. They immediately advise the president to not bomb Piedmont. After finding out that Wildfire was a project created for the sole purpose of finding such a pathogen and it being used in germ warfare, Andromeda mutates and escapes the containment room to where Dutton is working. Hall realizes that Andromeda thrives in a narrow pH range, and the baby's rapid breeding kept its blood alkaline, which means high pH, and that the old man was suffering from acidosis, which is low blood pH. And this is how they survive. Hall instructs Dutton to rapidly breathe in the trapped room so he can survive. But then he observes a rat which is in good health beside Dutton, which means that Andromeda has mutated and has become benign to terrestrial life. However, Andromeda's mutation has now started to deteriorate the lab, which has triggered the facility's nuclear destruction countdown. Hall races against the clock to reach a substation with the key, but he has to avoid automated lasers, which are intended to kill escaped lab animals. He is hit with lasers several times, but he manages to disable the bomb before passing out. The military then releases a silver iodide near the clouds over the desert, which will stimulate rain in the hopes that it will wash the organism to the ocean, where the alkalinity of the ocean will eventually destroy it. The film ends with a close-up of Andromeda. It seemingly mutates again. The end. So, Geoff, just thoughts just right on that synopsis and, just when you hear about it, is this something that you think is very interesting? Does it entice you? Does it whet your appetite? What do you think?
Not really. And not to speak to your skill of writing the plot synopsis, but there's not a whole lot, if you're reading the back of the Blu-ray cover to compel you here. So, one would hope that there is some more compelling details just within the film itself to bring you along. But just sort of the surface level, not a huge compelling narrative there just to draw one in, I don't think.
Okay, so before we get into any trivia, I do want to again mention we are dealing with an adaptation of a Michael Crichton novel of the same name. I believe that the only other podcast review that we've previously dealt with a film adaptation of a novel was The Mosquito Coast. I don't think any other one was adapted from an original novel. What are your thoughts about film adaptations of novels? They're, of course, good ideas to generate film and interesting stories because most interesting stories do come from novella and fiction, but they often do lead to mixed results. I mean, the main problem is you can't fit every single detail and character moment in a novel into a 2-hour movie. So, of course, there are some commercial successes and some failures. Some good successes one could look at as Lord of the Rings, Jaws, Jurassic Park, as you mentioned, Harry Potter, and so on, which are more on the mainstream side. But I wanted to ask you in general, what are your thoughts about these kind of adaptations, and which ones do you think really have worked out or not, in your opinion? Any favorites that stand out, and also ones that you really have hated as films?
That is a very layered question, or has layered answers. I have very passionate and specific opinions on this topic. So I'm just going to go for it. And if you want me to just shut the fuck up so we can get on with it.
We can spend a few minutes on it, but yeah. Just start. Go ahead.
Well, just to answer your question, as far as favorites go, just off the top of my head, as far as very successful adaptations go, Lord of the Rings comes to mind. I know you're not a huge fan. I think that's extremely successful. I'm a fan of those films, and I think that the films surpass the novels in many ways. Jurassic Park.
Let me just jump in and state that I think they are wonderful films. The direction and the monstrous task of Peter Jackson to get that film adapted for the big screen.
Yeah.
Based on the subject matter, right?
Yeah.
So that was a feat, and he accomplished that, and he deserves all the credit in the world. And I loved actually the first movie. I felt the next two were really bland, but that's a separate podcast.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. But I think they surpass the novels, and I can get into how that's even possible. Jurassic Park, I think also, just because we were talking about it, was also a very successful adaptation. Thinking of there's so many as far as ones that have failed poorly, as far as novels that were really, really good that did not do so well on the big screen. I can't really think of too many right now. I think most, I don't know, anytime you sit in a movie theater and you're watching a movie and it's based on a book, before the movie starts, you're going to hear somebody complaining about it. Or Harry Potter was a pretty successful adaptation. I'm not a big fan of the novels. I'm not a big fan of the movies. They're good, but I think they were successful in what they were trying to capture. Just as, a couple words on, conceptually about how this works is people who are fans of a particular novel and then it gets adapted to the screen. So often you hear people will say, well, the book was better. Well, the book was better. And I don't think that is a fair criticism or a very insightful one either. It's easy to compare the two on the surface because the narrative structure of a novel and of a film are very, very similar. On the surface, many things cross over. The narrative arc, oftentimes there's acts in a novel, you have your characters, and again, the narrative structure is very similar, but they're very, very different mediums, and you can't compare them. That it's not apples to apples. It is an apples to oranges scenario. So you can't say that the movie was better than the book or the book was better than the movie, because they're too different to say that one's better than the other. You might enjoy one over the other, and they might have done a shit job with the adaptation and the movie sucks, or I can't think of a case where this has happened where you might have a shitty book and a good movie, but it's just...
I might have an example of that for you, but yeah, finish your thought.
Well, no, I was just going to say, it's too easy to say, the book was better. And you know what? I call bullshit on that. They're too different. It's necessary to separate the two. From the period of 2001 to 2012 or 13, when Harry Potter was the most gigantic phenomenon on planet Earth. 7 huge children's novels that every adult was reading for some reason, and then the movies, and then people complain, well, they left this out of the movie, and they left this out of the movie, and they left this out of the movie. Well, when the books ended up being, at one point, like 700 pages long, like, you can't have a movie that's 12 hours in runtime. You need to make decisions, and you need to cut things. Like, even the Bible's been edited, so nothing's sacred. And I feel it's a short-sighted criticism. So, yes, I'm fine when you want to adapt novels to film or to TV. There's been some good successes there. And if you're a fan of that novel, you gotta let it go when you want to watch the film. And if it doesn't live up, hey, them's the breaks. Go back and read the novel. That's fine. Anyway, that's my rant on it.
I generically agree with you. I mean, it's hard to compare because, as you had said, and I'd mentioned before, when you have a massive novel, you have to cut things out to fit it into a 2-hour time slot, right? So you will lose a lot of things, and then there's a lot of implied moments even though it may not be on the paper, as you read something in a novel, you're able to slowly interpret situations and dive into the characters even when the words aren't there as you're reading along, and because of the fast-paced visual medium of movies, you sometimes really can't. The movie doesn't stop to allow you to think and absorb some of these moments because you're going straight to a scene to a scene to a scene. So normally I would say that novels are better than their film adaptations in almost every way. Even though I agree with you really can't hit apples to apples. I think there's a couple of notable exceptions. For me, the most obvious one, mainly because it's so mainstream popular and it's such a great movie, as we talked about, is Jaws. Because there's some weird stuff in Jaws, the novel, that really hurts the story, and it plays out a lot more effectively in the movie. And this is like the relationship. Like, I don't even know if have you ever read Jaws?
I have never read the novel, no.
So do you know that Hooper had an affair with Brody's wife?
I did not know that. Interesting.
So very fucked up. It's stupid. And the way Quint dies this kind of works, but I think it's more satisfying in the movie. The payoff when the shark dies is in the novel. The shark is rushing towards Brody, and Quint wasn't eaten. His foot got tangled in all of those barrel drums with the rope, and he got dragged. And he just drowns from being in the water and being dragged. The shark doesn't eat him. But remember how he has that line that 3 barrels. He can't stay down with 3 barrels.
Yeah.
Well, Quint was the final straw that broke the camel's back. Him being dragged. So as the shark is rushing towards Brody, I guess the shark has a heart attack because the dragging weight was too much for him. Dies before he gets to Brody. It's kind of interesting that way, and the way, if you could film it interestingly enough, then it might have worked, but I think the payoff is so much more better in the movie, of course, right? So these are the kind of things like that. I mean, there's other ones that you talked about Harry Potter. I think that was a very successful adaptation, and I'm not going to bash it because it was meant for children, and something to get children to read is all the more better. Personally, for me, because I'm a huge fan of, I grew up with the Rambo franchise. I think it's an actual really good, First Blood's a really good film adaptation, a direct one with some minor changes. But I think aside from Jaws and Harry Potter, things like Jurassic Park and some Stephen King ones and other Michael Crichton ones, and there's so many out there. I also like some more stories film adaptations that are more inspirational from books, that they make a lot of changes. So another one could be Total Recall, which is a loose adaptation of Philip K. Dick's story, We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. Yeah. Right? So I think they kind of reworked a lot of it, but there's a lot of it that stays the same. Concepts are there, but the movie is something else a little bit. and I think it really worked out well. And we also have a lot of terrible film adaptations. You know, a recent one, you talk to really good ones, Lord of the Rings. Well, I could tell you another bad one is The Hobbit, because I read The Hobbit when I was little, and not just the idea of the movie being stretched out so much, but just it didn't do any of it justice anyways.
No, that's a really good example of where they really, really messed up, because it's a very simple, joyful tale. I mean, my mom used to read me The Hobbit like as a bedtime story when I was a small child, and I don't want to say fun, but the light fantasy nature of it is so great, and it's just a plotting mess. The film, the three, how they made it 3 films, Jesus, I don't know, but it's just a bore. That's a really good example of going the complete opposite direction.
I mean, that's just insultingly bad.
That's a cash grab, and it's a real shame. It's a real shame.
I'll just hit you with some trivia, and then we can get into the movie. So this film was released in 1971. It was made for $6.5 million, and the film made over $12 million in North America at the time, and earned another $8 million in movie rentals. So it was a moderate success for its time. This is one of the first films to use advanced computerized or optical visual effects with work done by Douglas Trumbull. Now, you might have heard of Trumbull's name. He's well known in the industry for visual effects work. He worked on Kubrick's 2001. He continued his FX work on Star Trek The Motion Picture, of course, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Blade Runner, to name a few of his more notable work. Interestingly, he turned down Star Wars because he was a little busy, but he could have been on that one.
Poor bastard.
But the interesting thing is here, he is not just effects work, he's also kind of worked a little bit hand in hand with some of the conceptual set design as well. And you can see a lot of Star Trek The Motion Picture, the beginnings of that in this movie. You know, those two did both, and I'm sure you had that feeling when you got onto the Wildfire Lab set. So it felt like an offshoot or an early offshoot of what the motion picture was going to be. So the Wildfire Lab was actually one of the most expensive sets ever built at the time. Cost $300,000, which seems small for us, but it was very expensive for them. And it was 70 feet deep by 30 feet wide on a soundstage. It's interesting that the novel was released in 1969, and the rights for this film was immediately snatched up as the movie was shot in 1970 and then released in 1971. So that's a pretty quick turnaround. I found that interesting, because you don't really hear about, as soon as a novel's, released, it's like, oh, let's make it into a movie immediately, right? So it's usually a few years, and you let it build momentum.
Well, especially for a novelist at this point who was not a sure bet. He wasn't famous. This was his first. It wasn't his first novel, but this is the first novel he published under his own name. So he was not a known commodity at all.
And I don't know the history, like who wanted to really make this film, but I really wouldn't be surprised if it was Robert Wise who probably read the novel and said, "Let's do this." And
that very well could be.
Yeah. I kind of feel this is something really up more of his alley, and he's the one who probably spearheaded the project anyways. So another interesting thing is the computer error at the end is 601 due to the overload while it's trying to analyze and simulate Andromeda's growth and mutation. The error number is a reference to the computer overload error of 1202, which is exactly double of 601, which actually occurred during the first lunar descent on their computers. It couldn't simulate, it just overloaded. So a nice little throwback there. Yeah, and then the 4 lead actors are fairly non-recognizable stars, and we could talk about how well that worked out or not as we go through the movie. The only one, and you might get a kick out of this, the only one I did recognize when I watched this was James Olsen, who played Dr. Hall, and he was, if you recall, he was General Kirby in Arnie's Commando.
Oh, that's right.
Aside from that, none of these guys, I mean, they didn't do a lot of work. I'm probably a lot of small credits from what I saw. I skimmed through a couple of them, but no, not much else, and they've been out of the work for a while. So, any thoughts on the trivia here, Jeff?
I guess we can talk about the cast sort of as we go through the lack of recognizable actors. I thought was, I don't know, deliberate. I don't know if it was a deliberate choice or not, but I thought it served the film quite well. Like what you were saying there about the quick adaptation of the novel into a film is interesting, because that's actually been the case on a number of Michael Crichton's novels, but much later in his career when he was a very bankable writer, when you just his name would sell a film. Rising Sun's a good example where it was made into a film the same year that the novel was published.
I remember that movie. I don't remember how it ended. Yeah, it was Connery, Snipes, and I remember a lot of nudity. That's what I remember.
Yeah. Actually, I kind of like that movie, as terrible as it is.
Yeah, maybe that's a good one to do one day.
Yeah, it might be.
Any other thoughts?
Nope. Let's get into it.
All right. So I just actually wanted to, as this movie opens, it goes straight into the title card and the credits, and it's kind of like a cool retro kind of spooky opening, very ominous. The music here is very sharp and tech sounding, kind of appropriate. And I did notice like there got some scientific support from Caltech and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
Yeah.
What did you think of these credits? And just the thought that they actually got a lot of support, a lot of backup cred from well-known institutions.
Yeah, I think that works well. I mean, this obviously predates our lifetime, but this is only a few years removed from the moon landing, the first moon landing. And, so they can use these credits, I guess, if you will, to lend some credibility to what's going to be happening in the storyline here. That helps. You talked about how ominous sort of the music was and the title card. When you throw in those credentials for a movie like this, it makes it a bit scary. I mean, you're going, like I say, it's only a couple years removed from the moon landing. We're going out into the unknown for the first time. A very effective use here, I think, to help, build the dread, build that feeling of ominousness.
And I agree. And
cool.
An interesting note is they pulled, well, I wouldn't say because they kind of originated this, if it is original here, but they did a Blair Witch kind of thing where they kind of said, this faux, fake kind of like warning, like this actually kind of happened, and it's kind of like the events you see has actually happened, and it's a documentary.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, and then you get the scientific support from Caltech and this, and I agree with you. It automatically establishes the tension, the mood, the credit, and it gives some credibility to the film right here. And that's a very good point you brought up, Jeff. Something I didn't think about is that, it was only a few years after the moon landing. So, this is really a hot topic. It's on everybody's mind, space and exploration. And when you start getting movies like this now again, where you reestablish that fear of the unknown, it's very effective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the movie opens with obviously the military observing that town in the middle of the desert, Piedmont. They're looking for their crash satellite that has returned to Earth, and this couple guys go in there after talking to an Air Force base, and they see a bunch of bodies. You hear them over the radios. They're being monitored by the military back at the base, and you just hear them say they see a bunch of bodies, and then they scream. Apparently, so something bad has happened to them. So the Air Force sends aircraft in for a jet to make some surveillance passes, and he sees and video records all the bodies all over the town. So Army obviously declares a state of emergency, and this Major Dad guy, he calls in a secret code called wildfire alert, and that's, as we come to know, is a code for a potential extraterrestrial organism, which has come back with the satellite. So what did you think of this established opening here?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good opening. I mean, we don't get a lot of exposition. They're just kind of going about their business. Mm-hmm. What I like about movies of this era is that there isn't a whole bunch of exposition. We kind of get started and we just sort of go. And we don't have characters walking down hallways talking to each other they're telling each other about what's going on and about their feelings and their conflicts and bringing everything to the surface. I find that, such an annoying feature of modern day storytelling. It's minimalist. It's kind of like they put the camera down and these guys are just going about doing their jobs. It doesn't do a whole lot more than that, but it's sort of a workman-like way of going about business. I think that's an effective way of opening a film. We kind of just get into it. Nobody's thoughts and feelings are being verbalized. We just get we get it and we go.
I agree with you. For the most part, I love the fact is, we just get into it, we go, there's no exposition, it's refreshing, especially considering today's mainstream movies. It's too layered with too much exposition. But what immediately starts drawing me out is some of the acting. And this is, I think is going to be a recurring problem for me throughout this movie. And whether it was deliberately done or not, I hate the fact that, it just, something so simple can take me out of a movie, and I don't know why that is. All these D players here are just terrible. And I don't mind that if it's just in a few scenes, but then we'll talk about it as we go forward. But I agree with you. The exposition is minimal, and that is very refreshing. So we get some scenes here then of the army after wildfire has been launched. The army's then collecting all the SMEs, or the subject matter experts, which are the scientists and the doctors here. And, you take a look at especially, Dr. Jeremy Stone. He's kind of like the Nobel laureate leader, and, he's the first one who gets called. And what did you think of let's just group them all in. What did you think of all their intros? You get a small glimpse of their lives and families and jobs. Are these good intros or effective? Were they even necessary considering how the rest of the movie plays out?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, so our introduction to is it Dr. Stone, that he's the main guy, right?
Yeah.
Where he's having the party at his house, made me think of Mad Men for some reason. And I know that obviously this is several decades ago, and this is probably a thing people do, but I found it a little bit humorous just to see this sort of very formal party at somebody's house. Everybody's wearing a suit and a tie and everything. So that his particular introduction, I thought, was a little silly. The other ones were fine. I didn't mind the introduction of Dr. Levitt. I thought her introduction was fine. Was any of this necessary? I don't know. I think it is, because it saves us from exposition maybe later on in the film where they all have to introduce each other or themselves to each other and give the backstories. We get a quick character hit from each of them. This is actually something that we would definitely see in a modern day film if we were putting together an ensemble. So it's okay. What I did like, and I'll bring it up now, we kind of mentioned it earlier, the lack of very recognizable players. I had no idea who any one of these actors were. I had no idea. And that's the one thing. The second thing is, if you made this today and they did remake it again in 2008, you'd make them all young and hot, right?
Yeah, young, hot, they have a lot of problems. You'd have a couple of them have a lot of problems. You spend about 20 minutes dealing with those problems. Will Smith would be one of them, and he'd have a daughter or a son, probably played by his real life unwanted daughter and son. And, he'd have to have a 10, 15-minute relationship with each of them, and then probably another 5 minutes with his wife.
Absolutely. It's like Kate Mara would be playing Dr. Levitt, and she'd have like a low-cut tank top, but she'd still be kind of frumpy as a scientist, but she'd still be super hot and shit. And you know what? I'm glad, like, they look like 4 scientists. Mm-hmm. Just, they're a little older, they're established, they don't go to the gym 5 days a week, they look like normal, regular people. I really appreciated, that. The quality of performances we could talk about as we go along, but that was the first thing that struck me.
It's a fair and it's a good. But going back to establishing who they are, I mean, you're talking about a lot of their qualities that you get to know or would be present if we skipped these scenes. I felt that these intro scenes, like with the family or at their jobs, was completely unnecessary. I think you could have just had Dr. Stone and Dr. Hall just go to the town. You see Dr. Hill, Dr. Dutton, and Dr. Levitt just go towards as we'll talk about, the base itself, and that's our introduction to them. That's good enough, because they don't talk about their families or anything, any of their backgrounds really later. And you could still have that discussion about the odd man hypothesis, which is the one guy who is the only guy who does no, family or there'd be no restrictions. He'd be the one who can make the tough, rational decision. And that's why Dr. Hall's given the abort key for the nuclear countdown, because he can make the rational decision. He doesn't have a family to save. So you could still establish that, that Dr. Stone had a family or other people have problems. And I'll get into like you'll come to understand about Dr. Levitt's side story about her epilepsy, which I found was just useless. So I think the bulk of this movie really sticks straight forward to what I'm going to be calling the scientific method, which it is the scientific method. This is the scientific method, the movie, right?
That is absolutely the case. I totally agree with you.
So I find it completely out of place, and I wish that because this movie's 2 hours. I think we could have shaved off 5-10 minutes of the movie and gotten straight to the base. Straight to the town, straight to the base, and just ignore all of the collection of these people, because I guess they're trying to say it humanizes certain people so the audience can get attached, but there's no real there's not a lot happen in this movie except for the analysis of the organism, so I really don't understand why we bothered going there. But anyways, enough about that. I thought it was unwarranted and unnecessary. So as Dr. Stone and Hall visit the town, they're in hazmat suits, and as they search, I really liked some of the direction here. They had some nice wide shots, establishes the scope of the town, the practical effects, whether this is a real town or it was built for the movie, the isolation, the creepiness, ominous feeling. And we also started getting that split screen comic book-like panels of as they're peeking into the buildings, and through the windows you get dead bodies and faces of people. I think you get kids too, you get animals, it's really, they don't stop short and they don't pull punches. You see dead kids, you see dead dogs, and you see people's warped faces as they're dead. And I really like these scenes. It, again, sets the tone, and I found it really unique for the time, especially that comic book-like panel way of showing things. And what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, this sequence here when they're in the town is my favorite part of the film. And yeah, the split screen panels, very neat. I like it. You don't see it very often. You see it here and there. Ang Lee's Hulk comes to mind.
I was thinking the same thing. That's an obvious one you can pull up. Yeah,
maybe not the best example, but
I like that style he brought to it. It's just they're too bad the movie sucked.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that could be a whole series, Ang Lee's Hulk, but a series of critical podcasts, Ang Lee's Hulk. Sure, our devoted audience wants to listen to that one. Fuck. But this is a great overall sequence here. The town, the split screen's very fascinating, and I completely agree. We're not shying away from showing the animals, the kids, and it looks good. It's creepy. It's ominous. It's played well. It's again, like Robert Wise has sort of a minimalist style, and it serves him very well in this scene here. I think it works well because we don't know what's going on, and we're getting kind of creeped out because we don't know what's going on, but obviously it's bad.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I did find it funny that they finished these, comic book split screen type shots with the dead naked girl, and they zoom in on her tits. So,
well, I mean, it's Hollywood, man. You gotta have tits. It's Hollywood.
So as they continue exploring the town, they find the satellite, which was opened in the doctor's office, and obviously doctor's dead. And they found the hungry baby and the sick old man. And when they cut open the doctor's wrist, they found that all of his blood had turned into powder, so a complete blood clot. And because of this, they leave. Dr. Stone suggests nuking the town, and then you start to see now some of the relationships and the back and forth between the White House Situation Room and the president's advisors and the scientists. And the president doesn't want to nuke the town right away, despite Dr. Stone's recommendation. But I did like the fact that now you're starting to get into that back and forth between the science and the politics mix, right? You see the wheels turn. This is crisis management without dumbing things down, and this will continue in a few other scenes throughout the movie, with the exception of the terrible acting here. And I think that these advisors are the worst of the bunch in the movie. I did like the concept of these scenes. So what are your thoughts?
I like the concept of the scenes. The acting doesn't bother me so much here, but it's pretty underwritten. There isn't a whole lot for an actor to grab onto. It's a situation where, say the lines because we need to, they're concerned about the plot, right? That's where the script is focused on the plot, the story is focused on the plot. So these guys are just reading lines in order to service the plot. So unfortunately, they're not given a whole lot to work with. Yeah, it's not great performance, but can't squeeze water out of a stone either. So
but these were supposed to be what I was hoping was going to be a more deeper level of a relationship for crisis management. You sometimes it's funny, you get some more of that in mainstream movies where those disaster movies like Armageddon or Deep Impact or whatever. Some of those relationships a little bit more in detail. I was surprised as we moved forward how little we got on the other side. And I was hoping like the political side. And I think that this movie could have benefited more from those relationships and seeing how things are being dealt on the other side here, instead of just only focusing like 99% of the time on the scientists. And I was hoping for more of that. While we did get a few scenes, it did leave me wanting a lot more. Anyways, let's move on. Next we see Dutton and Doctors Dutton and Levitt go to another isolated area in the desert where Wildfire's base is, and disguised as an agricultural farm. Then all of a sudden, Bond meets Star Wars Episode 4. The secret elevator trope is followed by a cheap graphic, which I love, of the elevator going down deep into the ground. And I was like chuckling because it reminded me of that cheap, lazy Death Star plan graphic from A New Hope.
Yeah, totally.
That's the first thing I thought.
I love the elevator, though. I thought that was great.
Yeah, it actually reminded me in so many Bond films as well. I mean, the one that comes off the top of my head is Thunderball, very similar, where the guy Spectre agent goes right into kind of like a little office room, and then it just goes down. It's all steely and very similar. And then you even get that in Dark Knight Rises and so many other movies. You get these little things, and it's just a trope.
Yeah.
But now we're starting to get some neat scenes because now they're in the Wildfire base, and they're starting to go through the many layers of decontamination. And so I have some questions for you here. But let me first just say this. First, what did you just in general think of the decontamination process? And, it's very long. It felt really real. The stages of it made complete sense. And you could also comment on the sets you see here. And I found it interesting because, like, as they're going down and down and down towards where the contagion is, it's like, thematically, they're just going more towards hell. So I found that kind of interesting. So what did you think about that?
I thought the set design was excellent. You're right. You get the seeds of Star Trek the Motion Picture here. And yeah, I thought it was very realistic. I thought it was a very good choice. I really liked the computer graphics where they detail the station. I was kind of surprised that they...
That actually feels a little bit like Episode 4 as well.
Yeah, it kind of does.
That feel.
Yeah, and I thought that was really cool. And when I was watching it, what I thought was, it feels very authentic. I have no idea if that's exactly what the protocol would be, but it felt very authentic, and it's very, it's very contrary to what, we would expect to see in a film where they would generally cut this kind of stuff out or streamline it or something, and they didn't. They kind of made us go through the same slog as the characters had to go through. I kind of like that when the style matches the form or the content of the film, right? The characters are going through the slog, so we're kind of going through it with them. So I thought that was a good choice from a storytelling perspective.
I did like these scenes, and the stages of it felt real. So I have one other question for you for this is, out of all the decontamination processes, which one did you find the most interesting, and which one would you want to go through?
Oh, I want the one where I get a hot girl rubbing biogel all over me. Oh, wait, that was Star Trek Enterprise. Sorry. I mean, I can't recall exactly all of them, but I guess like my favorite sequence of this here wasn't exactly a decontamination process, was when they're eating and it's just like all this bland food.
Right.
And then the one guy says, like, well, you're not even going to get food like this good on level 6 or whatever. And they go from there. So that was good. What about you?
No, I like the xenon light one with the rhinestone helmet because it'll give insight into how Michael Jackson lived his life in his personal house.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Full body wax all in one go. I mean, but on a serious note, I think that actually was kind of neat. How all the layers of your epidermis kind of like was just shaved off, and it was just left in a fine layer of dust, and that was really cool. I liked that scene. So then we get some scenes after the decontamination process is like several hours worth of them going through that. So they each retire to their quarters, and you see each of them dreaming, and they each have some backstory of their characters, and they all predicted the pathogen and extraterrestrial life, and the possibility is strong of this happening. And I thought these were worthless scenes. But what I did like is when Hall wakes up, he's woken up to a sexy computer voice. At least it wasn't Majel Barrett, but Hall seemed pretty attracted to it. But then he gets a cold dose of reality because he's being monitored constantly. So some other man voice comes on and goes, "Sir, that voice belongs to an 85-year-old woman." So that's a cold shower for you, right? No time for love, Dr. Hall. So then we get to the kitchen scene you talked about, and this is where Dr. Stone starts to initially break the objectives of the study, what they're going to do down. And I like the set. I liked this conversation. And as I mentioned, this is really your first glimpse of what the rest of the movie will be, is really the scientific method. And I even liked how this kitchen scene ended, is because, they even still there's still the one decontamination process left. And I think it's cleaning out the gut. So I like that. And you can't have sugar in the gut. And I liked some of these conversations because it is completely realistic. There's a lot of truth, a lot of science that went behind the novel, the screenplay, the dialogue, and I loved it. This is something I could see my asshole doctor telling me I got to do. So, and so they're going through it. So it's like, fuck yeah, right? So at least it's not me. Then we get to see some cool scenes in the control room. And this is where they're going to start to expose the open satellite to some animals. You get to also see the mechanical arms, which is kind of cool using through the window and things. But now let's get into what, through my research, and not surprisingly, I was shocked when I first saw it as well, and I'm curious to see what you think of, is the tests on the rat and the monkey. And from my research, this is the most, you Google the Andromeda strain, and this is what you're going to see. People talk about this scene. So you get the rat and the monkey exposed to the open satellite, where obviously this pathogen is located, and they die. And you see them die, which on film. But before I give you any trivia, what are your thoughts, stance, concerns? You talk about animal rights. Were you shocked when you saw this? Because this isn't just your normal animal kind of gets shot or animal just falls asleep. You can tell that they're suffering here.
Yeah, it's very disturbing. No question. And it's meant to be, well, at least I hope it's meant to be disturbing. I hope it's not meant to just be cold. And this is what happens in laboratories when they do animal testing. I think that it's more common to do the testing on rats. I don't know that a lot of testing, at least in the Western world, happens on monkeys anymore. Not easy to watch, no question about that. When to go back to the opening credits, they say that the all animal activity was supervised by the American Humane Association or whatever. It doesn't mean that it was condoned or that animals weren't harmed. It just means that they were there and watched.
Yeah, essentially that's all it is. We watched it, but it doesn't mean that they didn't suffer.
Yep, we supervised it, and they made those animals suffer.
Yeah,
I don't like it. I don't like it. You couldn't do that. Like, you couldn't do it today. Like, there's no way you could do it today. I don't know if they actually killed those animals or if they just did something else to, knock them unconscious and they were fine afterwards. But if they killed them, which, I mean, it's the 70s, so, it's like the Wild West in Hollywood. I didn't like it. I was disturbed, but at the same time, like, I understand that is in fact how lots of tests do happen.
I'm surprised you didn't use the word unsettled, but that's okay.
Yeah, well, I already used that. I don't have any left. So
Yeah, you don't have any left. Well, I'm glad you have a heart, Jeff, because yes, I was also very disturbed when I initially watched this. In fact, I was so shocked with the rhesus monkey death on screen that I paused the movie and I had to go straight to Google to do the research and saying what happened here. And what happened, according to which everyone says is true, I'm going to take them for their word, is for the monkey, is that whole room, the monkey's cage, because it was filled with oxygen, but the entire room was in a vacuum. Or just filled with CO2. I can't remember which one it was.
Yeah.
And when they opened the cage for the monkey, he couldn't breathe and he was suffocating. But I think it was CO2, so he passed out and he would have died. But there was a vet there as he finally passes out after 6-7 seconds of suffering. Then he got there and put an oxygen mask on him, and apparently the monkey was brought back to life. So, but pretty much on the verge of death there. Obviously, no word on the rats, and I'm going to go on the assumption that they just let them die.
Well, probably. I mean, and just thinking about how movies are, where you got to be prepared for multiple takes.
Yeah.
And, killing a few rats, probably not a big deal, but monkeys, I'm assuming, are more expensive. So.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that went back down to cost. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, not surprised. I am shocked, not happy with it. And I guess that's the one benefit of CG, good CG now, is that they had to do it now. At least you get a couple of the suffering scenes would be the CG portions and not anything else. So,
yeah.
So in that respect, that's the one blessing of a good CG. But yeah, I wasn't a fan of this, and this is a scene that's drawn much controversy, still talked about to this day if you do the research online, and not surprised. This is one of the more controversial scenes with respect to animal rights in movies. But yeah, too bad for those animals. I felt sorry for them. So I wanted to also talk to you now because we've had, even though the movie is still probably only 40 minutes old at this point, what are your take on these characters and their relationships or lack of relationships with each other? Is this realistic because they are still strangers and they're focused on a task? So is this where you want to see them at this point, and or are you yearning for more?
Well, that's a good question, and I think that kind of comes down. This is where we get to the crux of my criticism of the film. So, first of all, it is a very accurate and honest adaptation of the novel, which is to say that it is focused on the science and the scientific method, and the characters are secondary to that. So the movie is being very true to the original story. And then, as you said, like this is basically, scientific method, the movie.
Yeah.
So I think it's very realistic. I mean, it would be realistic. Like maybe they would establish friendships or rivalries or whatever, you never know what you're going to encounter when you throw people together in an isolated and stressful situation. You don't know what you're going to get. I think you would get a little bit more natural camaraderie between people, but you might not. The thing is it's not about them. So any character work here, any relationship work here would be superfluous in context of the story and what the story is trying to be. So yeah, I kind of yearn for more because I prefer character-driven stories. I think that's a stronger way to tell stories is because I think stories are more compelling because of the characters, the people who inhabit them. That's why they're interesting. So when you remove that from a film or from any story, then you're taking a risk because then it's the plot and the concept that have to fill the void, right? That would otherwise be occupied by the human drama. So is that happening at this point? I mean, I don't know. I don't think so. So yeah, I kind of want a little bit more, but I know that it's not missing because it's missing. It's missing because they're deliberately not putting it in.
Yes, I mean it's a choice, and it's a faithful adaptation of the novel, and you're focusing so much on the analysis and the mystery and the investigation and the science. And it's also semi-realistic, I guess. They are strangers, and you picture yourself, you're one of these people, you're brought to this lab, and you've got a virus that's killed so many people, and it could kill so many more, and you have 48 hours where the president's about to send a nuclear bomb. You don't really have a lot of time to forge relationships. You got to do the work, and there's a lot of work to do, so you got to get at it. So
yeah,
for that, I like the fact that they didn't try and spend a lot of time talking to each other, exposition, or they would have been wasted scenes because in the end it goes nowhere and the movie's not about that. But then a semi-important question, or a related question as well, is if they had put A-list actors here, like a Robert Redford or a Paul Newman or someone like that at the time, would they have brought something better or worse to this movie if they still focus solely on the science?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Robert Redford might have been an interesting choice. That might help because sometimes when you get an actor who's really, really good, even when the script is bare bones, when the dialogue is bare bones, they bring so much personality to it that it does help make it a little bit more compelling. There's plenty of instances where that's been the case in film, where it's been a very underwritten role, but a good actor has been able to bring more to it, so it's just more watchable. The charisma alone helps.
There'd be even a little bit of nuance that could bring a layer to a personality, even if they're focused on a task.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it's a mixed response because I would want to see those A-list actors focus on something like this because I think that would be an interesting film experiment, actually. If I wanted to do something really unique, I would get very recognizable stars, but they'd have nothing with respect to relationships with each other. It'd be focusing on a task in a similar manner as this, and I'd like to see that as an experimentally driven film, how that would work, because I think that's something Hollywood has not done, and they should do, and I think that'd be interesting. But the problem is then, as we talked about, you get A-list actors, they're going to say, where's my relationships? Where's my dialogue? Where's my family? I want to be the family man. Will Smith's going to come in and say, where's my kids? So,
yeah, well, a guy
this
like
is
Will
the
Smith
problem.
would definitely say like, well, where are my kids? And I think there are actors out there who would be considered A-list and would do something like that and have done that, but it's extremely, extremely rare. It's extremely rare, especially now where the bigger budget movies are. They're down to the established formula, which is fine for a lot of movies that are still very good. But yeah, hard to have those sort of minimalist performances from the big players.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Okay, moving on. See Stone and Levitt analyzing the satellite very carefully, while Dutton is determining the size, potential size, and how the virus is transmitted. And I loved, again, going back to the scientific method portion of it. This is, I found, is where the strength of the movie was for me, because I loved how they showed all the experiments to determine the size of what it is, and how, even though despite they might be showing some more torture scenes of these rats and suffocating them, and you get a glimpse into the kind of procedures real life scientists would use. And even you see Stone doesn't even want to, skip any procedures or protocols, because you see Levitt trying to shortcut or fast track some of the results. But this is a slow process, and he keeps saying it's slow. We got to take our time. We got to do every single inch. We can't miss anything. And I thought these are great scenes here. What did you think of some of these initial experiments and the concept of showing how they're determining these things?
Well, again, this kind of comes, like I said before, kind of comes back to my central criticism. I don't want to say criticism, it's not the right word, but I guess my central analysis of the film, which is that it feels very authentic. Mm-hmm. When the two of them are scanning the satellite, and they see the dents in there, and they're scanning closer and closer, trying to find the pathogen, and again, where they're doing the meticulous testing with the animals, right? They're trying to find the vectors of contamination. Can you catch from a corpse? Is it airborne? Is it this? Is it that? I mean, all of it is very, very authentic. It feels very authentic, which I appreciate. We're not.
It's authentic, but it's not dramatic for you.
It's not dramatic. I mean, okay.
But that's the point of the movie, though.
Well, exactly. Yes, it is. It is the point of the movie.
That's a choice.
So that's why I say that's kind of that's sort of the tug of war that's going on in my person, is the authenticity versus the drama. I'll give you an example where it's a total piece of shit. Okay.
Sure.
So my spouse likes to watch the TV show Bones, which has been on for like 11 seasons, I think. Okay. And they've done some decent character work on there. I'm not a huge fan of it myself, but it's certainly not a bad TV show.
Why are you watching?
Why am I watching?
Yeah.
Because I'm in the same household.
I don't. This is another podcast. My wife watches that show too, and I won't go through it go near it with a 10-foot pole.
I've never watched an entire episode start to finish, but like it's on, so like I'm aware of it, right? And because it's been on for 11 years, I certainly absorbed some. So when the show was first on, because I tried to watch it at the start because she liked it, so I'm like, I'll give it a shot. They had this technology in their office that was like a holographic projector that could reconstruct somebody's face from their bone fragments and stuff. And 10 years ago and even today, we don't have holographic projectors that can do this. So it's impossible technology that they just throw in there for dramatic purposes to help move the plot along. They eventually scrapped that concept, and it's the kind of thing that lots of movies do and lots of TV shows do that I fucking can't stand, because it's the technology doesn't exist, nor is there any real basis for it to be able to exist. And
yeah, they're just making shit up.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not supposed to be science fiction.
That's right. It's not science fiction, and yet they're making it science fiction. So they're not making it about the science. Right? They're just making it palatable for, Joe Blow primetime. So in this movie here, we don't get that. They're not making any shit up. They've got the robotic arms, which exist. Everything there is perfectly reasonable with what is possible at the time. And that is, I mean, I can't express my appreciation for that. That's fucking great. But I'm still watching a movie with people and a story, so I'm still feeling like I'm missing a vital component of having a story told to me. And so that's the kind of that's the tug of war that's going on with me when I'm watching these scenes.
Okay. I hear you, and I think that's a valid criticism of this movie. But we'll talk more about that maybe at the end, because that's going to be repetitive and reoccurring throughout this thing. So as Stone and Levitt find a small, tiny meteorite on the satellite, they find that this greenish paint-like substance is throbbing. It must be alive. They could see it growing. And when you start seeing it move and change color, I found these some effective scenes here with some ominous music. We haven't really touched on the music, but when it does come into play, I felt it was very effective. And then the choice of not using a lot of music through the movie is a very bold choice. I mean, I guess many movies from the 70s do that. But what did you think of that? Like, when you did hear the music, was it effective?
I mean, I suppose so. Yeah, it didn't sway me one way or another, to be honest with you.
Oh, okay. Okay, no, fair enough. So we get next couple scenes here. So Hall, who's the main doctor, MD, he's analyzing the old man who has ulcers and looking at the baby who he's still trying to figure out what's wrong there. And then we're intercut with some scenes of the pilot who flew over Piedmont. His mask finally disintegrates. So I guess that the pathogen was exposed. He was exposed to pathogen in some manner, and he kind of passes out as plane crashes, and then you see a black box being retrieved later, and you get some back and forth scenes in being intercut between what's happening in the lab and what's happening outside. And you're getting the point of view of military and the point of view of the scientists. Now, for me, I think the movie was trying, it's a weak attempt. It was trying to show, as mentioned before, the conflicts and relationships here that I wish was more explored, and they dropped the ball here. And I was really hoping for some more outside influence on what was happening inside the lab. And I think that could have maybe helped you out in a sense, because then maybe you might have had some more dramatic moments and some more tension. Do you agree?
Okay, so you're saying that you wanted more influence from the outside world on the events in the lab.
Yeah, like I don't need to see the president sitting there having Morgan Freeman having a monologue to himself, right? So that bastard can just go back to his stupid Visa commercials, because I'm sick of them. So, but I don't need to see a president or him talking to his VP and just saying, oh, well, what should we do? Oh, I don't know. What should you do? Oh, we should go 48 hours. Are you sure about that? And stuff like that. I kind of wanted to see more of maybe, because we do find out later that Wildfire is a germ warfare base. Yeah. So maybe they could have had some kind of discussions through the military and maybe president's, advisors or chief of staff or, security chief. And maybe they could have been doing something to kind of maybe threaten, come into Wildfire and take things over, right? I go back to Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. It's like every time I have dealings with Starfleet, I get nervous, So I think, throwing in some dialogue there, having some back and forth scenes in play through maybe something like that kind of a storyline, even though it didn't need to be a focus, I think that could have maybe improved this film. See, I don't know about you.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. So I think what I would have enjoyed more, and I don't like to rewrite movies on the fly on the show here, but yeah, fuck it. What I think would have been really interesting is we had a true, to use a Star Trek term, ship in a bottle storyline here, where we had absolutely zero contact with the outside world. Either it was completely cut off or whatever. Nothing. We don't see what's happening outside. They don't get any communication from outside. Then we get the claustrophobia. We get the tension of being completely isolated. They don't, maybe Andromeda got loose on the surface. They don't know. They have to continue the work.
But you know what? The way you're describing it, you're describing so many horror or virus movies that already exist, and many of them do. I'd say 99% of them don't work in that manner.
Yeah, well,
that is a trope in horror movies. That's a trope in virus or disaster flicks. That's my worry here.
Well, I suppose I can.
They still have to do the analysis, so you're not going to avoid that.
Yeah, they still need to do the analysis, but I don't know. I thought. I just kind of thought of that just now as we were talking about it. I don't really want any influence from the outside world. I want the drama to come from them being in this isolated, because they make a big deal about how isolated they are, right? The decontamination protocols, them going deeper and deeper into hell, as you said. They are on their own down there. That's what we've been led to believe at this point, is they are on their own down there, but it never really feels as claustrophobic as I think it should. If it was, we've talked about it being authentic and realistic. If it was going to really go for that, wouldn't we if you were actually down there, no sunlight, no real food, no, you don't have real clothes, you don't have real anything, no real communication with the outside world. I mean, wouldn't that start to
Bad food, brutal discipline.
Bad food,
no women,
brutal discipline, no women.
That was the life, Will.
Oh, Picard, you celibate son of a bitch. Anyway, so yeah, I think that might have been a way to go. But anyway, that's just one man's opinion.
Oh, well, yeah, where are we here? So we get a scene of Levette now studying the growth cultures, and I found this interesting because you see a whole round table which is being rotated around and being examined under a microscope. You see all these cultures where, a piece of or a pathogen or organism has been placed into these cultures in different mediums, and she's analyzing the growth. But we as the audience are made aware that it does not grow in an alkaline medium, but apparently she sees no growth in red lights and she becomes epileptic or just has a seizure or just phases out. And I didn't like this B storyline of her having epilepsy. I think that instead, if they wanted to kind of save that reveal for later, they could have just stuck with what's happening and they didn't need to have her kind of forget about it, because I found it confusing. I had to rewind because I was saying, oh, did she notice? Did she not notice? What's going on here? So even though I think they explain it later, but I think it was a pointless scene for her to miss it. So then we get to the next day. Now Hall is, thinking about blood acidosis. That might be the key. And then they finally codename the government codenames the strain Andromeda. I didn't have time to get through the bulk more trivia here. I had made a note, I believe, and I know there's the Andromeda galaxy, so maybe they just said, okay, there's a galaxy out there called Andromeda, so let's just call it that. The strain is from there. But there's also the Greek mythology, I believe she's the daughter of some kind of Greek god, and she gets chained to a rock. That's who Andromeda is, and she's in a lot of paintings. And the funny thing is she's a beautiful goddess who's just eventually, for some reason, gets chained to a rock. And I figured that's probably the influence here and why they called it Andromeda. Do you have any other information on Andromeda? My apologies for not completing the research, but that's from just off the top of my head.
No, I believe you're correct. Obviously the Andromeda galaxy, which is, just kind of named, the galaxy is named for the constellation Andromeda because it fits inside the constellation. So that's why the galaxy gets that name. But you're right. She, if I recall correctly,
I can't remember what Greek god is the father or the meaning behind her being tied to a rock. I just remember seeing a bunch of paintings of her.
Yeah. I don't remember her father, her wife. Yeah. Her mother was Cassiopeia. Cassiopeia, I think, she was like bragging about her or something, and that led to her sacrifice. Like chained to the rock is correct.
So that's where I figured, because this came in the meteor, the rock, and I'm assuming that's where the influence really is.
I mean, that could be. I mean, Michael Crichton was a medical doctor. He, obviously had extensive university education, so he probably had a couple Greek mythology courses that he had to take as his electives in there somewhere. So it's like, okay, well, yeah, there's a rock. She was chained to a rock. Okay, Andromeda. That's probably the extent of it for sure. I don't. Again, my Greek mythology is a little bit rusty, but I don't think there's a whole lot more underlying the name of it. I think for the novel and for the book, it's more, people are aware it's the name of a galaxy out there, or constellations up from outer space. I think that's probably the extent of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm assuming that's it too. So we get more scenes now. Again, the group talking to the military and the political advisors, because still advising them to drop the bomb on the town. And again, don't want to talk about too much, but again, every time these political advisors come up, the acting is just really taking me out of the picture. I'm really struggling when I see such terrible, terrible acting. And then we get the electron microscope scene, which I really liked, and this is where they find out that it's the crystalline structure. I love the electron microscope machine, and then they find out here Andromeda can function without amino acids, and you even see it dividing in a vacuum, because it's taking the energy away from just the microscope, the light. It doesn't waste any energy of any kind. And, it's a perfect organism. You have my sympathies. So they figure out at that point, the sudden realization that it doesn't waste any energy is they cannot drop the bomb because it'll act like a reactor and it'll divide a lot and just grow expansively, probably exponentially, and become massively big. So then they tell the president not to bomb, and he doesn't. And then there's a couple of more scenes about this germ warfare thing, which never went really anywhere, which was a major disappointment at this point in the movie for me. I was hoping this is where maybe some of the tension and drama could have come into play, but we've talked about that. And then here we get the stakes because some minor stakes have been raised here because now at this point a contamination alarm goes off and Dutton is trapped in the autopsy room, and again you get the stupid little plot line of Levette going into an epileptic seizure because of the red flashing lights, and they pump in pure O2 into the room to slow it down because Levette had previously mentioned that O2 does slow it down in terms of the growth culture. That Hall now gets the idea of letting Dutton rapidly breathe to simulate acidosis in his blood chemistry. And then he tells his assistant to get the blood pH reading of the baby, and he compares it to the old man, and one pH is too high, it's too alkaline, which is the baby. One pH is too low because of the acid, because of the sterno that the guy's drinking for his ulcers. So Hall then has the solution and says, let's check the Andromeda against pH, and they find out it just only thrives in narrow pH values. So what did you think of, these are a lot of scenes that happen within the course of maybe 10 minutes here, maybe even less. So it's a lot to absorb when you're watching the film. So what did you think of these conclusions, the way it was presented, the contamination alarm, those kind of stakes? Was there anything interesting here for you? Did you find that it helped make you enjoy the movie more?
Well, okay, so I'll tackle a couple of sections here. So first, when we talk about how they sort of figure out how to protect themselves against the organism, which is, that it survives in a narrow pH band. So either a high pH or a very low pH will retard the growth of the organism. I actually thought that was very cool. It's a perfectly logical scientific conclusion and resolution to a very a story that's about science. So that was great. If that's if you can actually do that I assume that Michael Crichton did his research there because he's a doctor. Mm-hmm. So I'll assume there's some truth to that. I don't know. The nuclear failsafe there, which was set up earlier when they first arrived at the wildfire base, and you knew that was going to be a factor later on, right? If you, as they say, if a gun shows up, it has to go off. Mm-hmm. So, but it was sort of, I didn't like that because that is a way that they just invented tension and drama. And I don't think that was necessary. It was inconsistent with sort of the drive of the film, with the tone of the film. Are we talking about when he's climbing up the ladder getting shot at by lasers?
So we're not there yet. We're not there yet. It was just the narrow pH reveal because he's kind of found the solution in a sense, and then you just get the decontamination alarm, these kind of stakes that are happening, what's happening with Dutton, because I initially like these scenes. I love the conclusions that Hall draws because of the narrow pH range, and it makes complete sense. It can't live if the pH is too high or low, and that's why it's so hard. Conditions have to be so perfect for life to exist in any place. That's why it's so hard for scientists to even predict or find, planets in other galaxies that, are in that Earth zone that they keep talking about. So, but what I didn't like about this whole thing is that these stakes are immediately removed because you see the live rat there near Dutton. No, I'm worried about Dutton, even though you really don't care about him too much. Because these aren't people, the movie's not making you care about them. It's not about that. But the stakes are gone because the thing's mutated again. Now it's benign. Yeah. So it's like, why did they go down this route? I don't get it. They could have just had him rapidly breathe, and then they were worried about him passing out. I thought that could have been an interesting solution to try and solve for the dramatic stakes of the movie, and I think that's where they could have focused on. But instead, we get this useless other release, and he's got to disarm the bomb, and this laser dodging thing, which was ridiculous. I mean, let's talk about that. What did you think of the lone action scene, which I might add started with exactly 6 minutes left in the movie?
Yeah. Well, it's absurd. I mean, obviously there's some technological limitations here. It's like, it's stupid. It's like, okay, duck.
The funny thing is when he told him to duck, it's like he ducked, but then the laser doesn't even, I know there's one shot where the laser goes above his hand a little bit to, the right or the left. Yeah. So that was appropriate. But there was a couple of shots where it's like duck, but it goes way wide of him.
Well, it goes way wider, and he doesn't duck. He he dodges to the side, or I don't know. I hear duck, I tuck my head in and go down. Like I don't move to the side or anything like that. This is manufactured tension.
Yeah.
And it doesn't fit with the film. It's just there to...
Yeah, I like the concept. It's okay, but it's poorly executed is kind of where I want to go.
Yeah, it is poorly executed. I don't really like the concept where, you have to hit the fail safe because it was too obviously set up, at the start of Act 2. The only reason it's there is for us to be nervous about them not getting blown to Kingdom Come because they can't think of another dramatic conclusion. Then
Andromeda will become the super pathogen if it gets the nuclear energy.
Yeah, but the point is that they made that up because they knew that the drama about them figuring out the virus and it wasn't going to be enough for the conclusion of the storyline. Mm-hmm. And maybe they were right about that, but I don't know. Maybe if they had done a better job of filming it, it might have worked better. But it didn't work. It didn't work for me.
No, it didn't work for me either. This was the major disappointment of the film was the ending, and then I think they could have done something better here. And again, maybe dealing with the Army's requirements for germ warfare, and I don't know. Anyways, I mean, even that's been done to death in Hollywood. Yeah, I think just the stakes are just not here at this moment in the film. So the next scenes here is that because it is benign, apparently, to terrestrial life now, mutated just by chance to end the movie nicely. I think it's moved. I think in my plot summary, I mistakenly said it's still in the desert area, but apparently for some reason they tracked the Piedmont gases and it's moved with the winds towards the coast. So they're going to release some silver iodide in the cloud to stimulate rain, and they're assuming it'll wash into the ocean. The alkalinity of the seawater will not let it grow, it will remain dormant and benign. Everything seems okay. Everyone's happy. You have a couple of quick 2-second meetings between Dr. Stone and the government and a panel and saying, yep, it's all good, but what would you do if it happened again? Could it happen again? And that's the question. You have that ominous ending, computer overload. What do you do? What would we do? So Jeff, what would you do? That's my question. The end. What would you do?
Are you asking seriously? Like, what would I do?
Yeah, I don't know.
Like, if this were to happen again?
Yeah, no, I'm just joking. Okay. It's a joke. It's just it's a little bit of an ominous ending. You see it kind of mutate, computer overload thing again. And I mean, I like the last shot of it doing that, but yeah, the problem here is that this last 10 minutes really didn't do it for me, so I really didn't care how it ended anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of a Twilight Zone ending in that respect.
Sorry. That's actually a good comparison. This is a very bookend episode feel to something like a Twilight Zone or an X-Files episode. Yeah. Where everything has to reset to everything's hunky-dory again.
Right, exactly.
So that's the Andromeda strain, Jeff. So any thoughts now that we've gone through this? High-level thoughts, direction, writing, acting. If you could take anything away, I know you mentioned the word authentic. Is there anything else aside its scientific authenticity that is a positive aspect of this film?
Well, I don't know if it's a positive aspect of the film or a negative one necessarily. It just kind of is. It's very cold. Mm-hmm. It's very Spartan. It's very, I don't know the word I'm looking for, but it's very hospital-like. I think cold is the best word. And then that, again, as I said, because I've read the novel and as I watched the film and recalled the novel very true to it. And the novel was very much about the scientific method. It was very cold. Didn't give a shit about the characters or the human drama really at all. It was not about that. Mm-hmm. And which is fine. Like it wasn't about that. And you see, again, to go back to the novel and the many films that have been based on Michael Crichton's novels, you see very similar themes, obviously very focused on scientific concepts. But in a lot of the novels, it's a group of scientists or intellectuals who are brought together from disparate places in order to solve a problem using science. Mm-hmm. Jurassic Park, Sphere, Congo.
Well, why don't you? I was going to bring this up. I think the proper comparison is Robert Wise to Robert Wise, the Andromeda strain to Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
You know what? Very much correct. I think you're right. A thinking man's problem solved by thinking men and women. And I think you're absolutely right there. Except that in Star Trek: The Motion Picture, the character drama is relevant and
exactly.
explored.
And that's where I was going with it, is because that's the really the apples and oranges, like they're apples and apples kind of movie, and it's apples and oranges, and it's curious that it's an interesting comparison because it's the same director.
Yeah,
because
and
you have the character relationships there, and I think you have the proper stakes a little bit more than you do here. And I think it's a more interesting story and a more interesting mystery that Star Trek: The Motion Picture works. It's, levels beyond what this movie is. But it's also a different beast.
It is a different beast, but you can see how the addition of the human drama, the characters, helps elevate the stakes so that the problem feels more relevant. In Star Trek: The Motion Picture, it's only because of the relationships between Kirk, Spock, McCoy, the dynamic on the Enterprise where they displace Decker. I mean, I could go on, right? But all of that helps make the mystery of V'ger and the stakes mean something, right? In the Andromeda strain, I mean, it might just as well be a bunch of robots fighting a virus. Like, well, yeah, so what? Like, all right, we got out. Is it going to kill that? Is it going to kill that old guy? No, he's going to hyperventilate.
Maybe it'd be interesting if it was a bunch of Brent Spiners walking around, right?
A bunch of Brent Spiners walking. It'd be like Independence Day. The long hair and shit.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking more of a bunch of Datas, but yeah, we got that with Nemesis, so I know where that went. Maybe it'd be more comical. It's a bunch of B4s trying to figure out this thing. Oops. Yeah, no, anyways, I agree with you. On high level, first gut reaction when you watch this movie, it's like, I don't care about these characters. The stakes aren't there. The science is interesting. The process is interesting, but it's not enough for me to be, hold my interest. But, I don't want to, maybe we can go right into our final thoughts anyways, whether we recommend this or it's a rare antiquity. I do recommend this film still because it is so unique. And I do think it's a rare antiquity because of that uniqueness, but it's not a overly strong recommend. It's a medium recommend because there are relationship problems here. There is a connectivity problem between the average film goer and this movie. A lot of people will turn it off after 20 minutes. They'll lose interest. There are a couple of points that are struggle to get through. And even if it is unique in its concept about the science and focusing in on the science, I didn't like the acting, the B storyline stuff. We could have shaved off 10 minutes of this movie, and I think that would have helped. I also really, the only two of the scientists I really liked was really only Dutton and Hall. Stone was just, he was right and he was an okay leader and kept everybody focused, but he had no personality. I mean, none of them really did. I think the only one who really had any personality was Hall and a tiny bit Dutton. I think that's probably why you latch onto them a little bit more. But I still think it's a recommendation, even though it's a mild one. But it definitely is a rare antiquity because there's nothing else like it that I can recall seeing. How about yourself?
I don't know. I guess if I have to look back on the film, it's kind of dull. Like, it's kind of boring. And there isn't any human drama. There aren't any human relationships. I think that they made the movie. I think Robert Wise made the movie that he was trying to make. I don't think he made any mistakes in the sense of what his game plan was here. Because the novel itself was very cold. It wasn't about people. It was about science. It was about the scientific method. So in that sense, it's a success. If we're going to talk about rare antiquities or recommendation, I can't really recommend it, I don't think. There's no entertainment here. I'm not entertained by this. I appreciate the cerebral take on a problem. I think it's very admirable that they went for the science as opposed to an action solution, even though there was sort of the action sequence of 6 minutes to go, as you said, but not enough here. I think that stories, by their nature, need characters that make the story relevant. If there aren't good characters to make the story relevant, then the story's not relevant. It doesn't matter. I don't recommend it. Is it a rare antiquity? I don't know. I mean, I agree with you. There isn't anything else like it. They certainly don't make movies like this nowadays, and they maybe should take a few cues from it, but I'm gonna say no. It's not a rare antiquity. I'm not going to recommend it. Hard for me to say it, but
no, that's okay. That's good. As we discussed recently, we've agreed one too many times on this show, so it's refreshing that we actually have different opinions here.
Yeah. Any
other thoughts on the Andromeda strain? Because that's pretty much it from my end here.
No, I don't think I have any other thoughts on it. I mean, I think there is a lot to like here, and I hope that I hope to see certain concepts like this revisited in future films. But yeah, that's about it. It's a cool idea, but happy to move on from this one.
Okay, well, that does it for today's episode 23, The Andromeda Strain. Geoff, care to enlighten everybody what your pick is next?
Yeah, for sure. So, inspired by your pick of The Andromeda Strain, we are going to the 70s again, from a very famous director, also based on a novel. We are going to Robert Altman's 1973 adaptation of The Long Goodbye.
Oh, interesting. I've always wanted to see that film.
All right. Should be a good ride. I am actually reading the novel in preparation for the episode, so here's hoping it's not a big fat waste of time.
Yeah, and not too long of a wait. We'll see.
Yeah,
All right,
it'll be another
Geoff.
timely episode.
Anyways, Geoff, thank you very much for your time. It's a pleasure, and I'll see you again next time.
All right, man. Take it easy.